Victoria is easy to underestimate. On a map of Australia it looks small, a compact state tucked into the continent's southeastern corner. It is dwarfed by Western Australia, overshadowed by Queensland, pressed beneath New South Wales. And to many people, Victoria simply means Melbourne. But that small appearance is misleading, because within this one state lies one of the most geographically diverse landscapes in Australia. Snow-covered mountains rise almost 2 kilometres above sea level. Ancient forests cloak deep valleys and rugged ranges. Rivers born in alpine peaks flow across the continent into vast floodplains. Giant coastal lagoons sit trapped behind one of the longest beaches on Earth. A flooded Ice Age valley became the bay that built Melbourne. Gold-bearing uplands transformed Australia during the 19th century. Volcanoes erupted across the west. Sandstone mountains rise from surrounding plains. Semi-arid Mallee country stretches toward the interior. And along the southern edge, the Southern Ocean continues to carve away the continent itself. Victoria is not defined by one landscape, it is defined by collision. Mountains against plains, rainforests against dry country, volcanoes against ancient rock, rivers against deserts, and land against sea. To understand Victoria, we need to cross it. Not randomly, but as a journey, beginning in the far east where the state rises into its highest mountains. Then moving westward through Gippsland, the Great Dividing Range, Port Phillip Bay, the Central Highlands, the Goldfields, the Murray Basin, the Volcanic Plains, the Grampians, the Mallee, and finally, the wild southern coast. This is the geography of Victoria. Before we begin, if you enjoy these deep dives into Australia's landscapes, geology and natural history, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on the video. It really helps support the channel and allows me to keep creating documentaries like this. And I would also love to hear from you. This is a little different from my usual geology-focused videos. If you enjoy this broader journey through the geography of Victoria, leave a comment below and let me know. If enough people enjoy it, I'll create more geography documentaries exploring other Australian states and regions in the future. Now, let's begin in the east. Chapter 1. Where Victoria rises. Our journey begins in the highest part of the state, far from Melbourne, far from the volcanic plains of the west, far from the dry Mallee country near the South Australian border. Here, in eastern Victoria, the land rises into the southern end of Australia's greatest mountain system, the Great Dividing Range. This immense chain runs for more than 3,500 kilometres along eastern Australia, from Queensland through New South Wales and into Victoria. It is not a mountain range in the same way as the Himalayas or the Andes. It is older, lower, more weathered and more fragmented. Yet it remains one of the most important geographical features on the Australian continent, because the Great Dividing Range does exactly what its name suggests. It divides. On one side are the coastal catchments, shorter rivers flowing toward the Tasman Sea, Bass Strait and the Southern Ocean. On the other side are inland catchments, longer rivers flowing toward the Murray-Darling Basin and the dry interior. In Victoria, this divide becomes one of the keys to understanding the entire state, because the mountains in the east are not just scenic high country. They are a source of water, rivers and rainfall patterns, and in many ways, the source of the geography that unfolds westward from here. The highest expression of this landscape is the Victorian Alps. This is the roof of Victoria, a rugged region of ridgelines, snowfields, steep valleys, alpine plateaus and forested slopes. Mount Bogong rises to 1,986 metres above sea level. It is the highest mountain in Victoria. Nearby peaks such as Mount Feathertop, Mount Hotham, Mount Buffalo and Mount Buller form part of the wider high country. In winter, these mountains are transformed. Snow covers the summits. Cold winds sweep across exposed ridges. Roads climb into ski villages. And streams run through frost-covered valleys. And for a brief period each year, parts of Victoria resemble a landscape many people would never expect to find on mainland Australia. This is one of the strange things about Victoria. It is a state famous for cities, goldfields, farms and coastlines. Yet its eastern edge contains true alpine country, not simply cool hills or forested uplands, but environments shaped by snow, elevation, frost, wind and seasonal isolation. These alpine landscapes are rare in Australia. They occupy only a tiny fraction of the continent, and that rarity makes them disproportionately important. At lower elevations, the slopes are covered in forests. Tall eucalypts dominate the valleys. Mountain ash and alpine ash grow in wetter areas. Snow gums appear higher up, their twisted trunks and pale bark marking the transition into colder terrain. Eventually, as elevation increases, the trees thin. The growing season shortens, conditions become harsher, and the vegetation changes into alpine grassland, herb fields and low shrubs. This vertical change in landscape is one of the first major geographic patterns we encounter. In eastern Victoria, height controls climate, climate controls vegetation, vegetation controls soil, and soil helps control the rivers that begin here. This is why the Victorian Alps matter far beyond the high country itself. They are Victoria's water towers. Moist air arrives from the Tasman Sea, Bass Strait and Southern Ocean. When that air reaches the mountains, it is forced upward. As it rises, it cools. Clouds form, rain falls, snow accumulates. This is orographic rainfall, and it is one of the most important processes shaping eastern Victoria. The mountains squeeze moisture out of the air, then moisture feeds forests, it feeds rivers, and eventually it feeds regions far away from the mountains themselves. Many major rivers are born in or near Victoria's eastern high country. The Murray begins in the Australian Alps before forming most of Victoria's northern boundary. The Kure and Mitamita drain alpine catchments. The Ovens flows northward through northeastern Victoria. The Goulburn system is fed by highland catchments further west. The Snowy River drains rugged country before flowing toward the coast. And south-flowing rivers carry water into Gippsland and Bass Strait. This means the eastern highlands operate like a giant distribution system. Some water flows north into the Murray-Darling Basin. Some flows south toward Gippsland. Some moves west through river systems that will later support agriculture, towns, irrigation districts and wetlands. The mountains are therefore not isolated. They are connected to almost everything downstream. This becomes one of the central ideas of Victoria's geography. The east rises, the north receives, the south drains and the west changes. Without the mountains, Victoria would be drier. Its rivers would be weaker, its forests would be smaller, its agriculture would look different, and its settlement patterns may have developed in completely different ways. Yet the mountains themselves are not young. They are not sharp new peaks being rapidly pushed upward by an active plate collision. Australia is an old continent, and the rocks beneath the Victorian high country reflect that deep history. Many began as sediments deposited in ancient marine environments hundreds of millions of years ago. They were later folded, faulted, intruded by granites, uplifted and eroded. Over time, enormous volumes of rock were stripped away. Rivers cut valleys, weathering softened ridgelines, and the landscape was repeatedly modified. The modern Victorian Alps are the result of this long history. Ancient rocks, later uplift, ongoing erosion, and a climate cold enough at high elevation to preserve alpine environments. They are not mountains of violent modern plate collision, they are mountains of endurance. Old rocks lifted high enough to change climate, water, and life across the entire region. For thousands of years, Aboriginal peoples moved through and lived within these landscapes. The high country was not empty wilderness. It was known, visited, travelled, used and understood. Seasonal movement in alpine areas connected people with food resources, cultural places and mountain environments. Long before ski resorts, roads or modern maps, these landscapes were part of living cultural geographies. European settlement later changed the region dramatically. Grazing, mining, logging, roads, tourism and hydroelectric development all reshaped parts of the high country. But even today, large areas remain protected within national parks and state forests. The mountains continue to define eastern Victoria. They also set up the next part of our journey, because as we leave the highest peaks and move south and east, the landscape begins to descend. The rivers grow larger, the forests thicken. The mountains remain, but they become part of a broader, wetter region. A region where highlands, valleys, rivers and coastlines combine to create one of Victoria's most distinctive geographic worlds, Gippsland. Chapter 2. The Wet East. Gippsland is one of Victoria's great geographic regions. It occupies much of the state's east, from the high country and forested ranges in the north, down to the coast of Bass Strait in the south. It is not one simple landscape, it is a collection of landscapes tied together by water, mountains, forests, coal basins, rivers, floodplains, lakes, beaches, wetlands and coastal barriers. If the Victorian Alps are the roof of the state, Gippsland is one of the places where the water from that roof gathers, spreads and reaches the sea. This is why Gippsland feels so different from much of western and northwestern Victoria. It is wetter, greener, more forested and more humid, and in many areas more enclosed by mountains and vegetation. The region's geography is controlled by its position between highlands and ocean. To the north and west, elevated terrain captures rainfall. To the south, Bass Strait provides moisture, storms and coastal influence. Between them, rivers drain the mountains and deliver water toward lowlands and the sea. This creates a strong geographic gradient. In the north, Gippsland rises into rugged mountain country. Forests cover steep slopes, valleys cut through ranges. Some areas feel remote, even today. Further south, the land opens into agricultural districts and river valleys. Then, near the coast, the landscape flattens into lakes, wetlands, dunes, and beaches. Few regions in Victoria change so much over such short distances. East Gippsland in particular is one of the wildest parts of the state. Large areas are mountainous, forested, and sparsely populated. Rivers cut through rugged country before reaching the coast. The landscape here feels closer to southeastern New South Wales than to Melbourne or Western Victoria. It is a place of forests, river mouths, coastal inlets, and long stretches of relatively undeveloped shoreline. Moving further west through Gippsland, the geography becomes more varied. The Latrobe Valley opens as a major inland corridor. The area is famous for its brown coal deposits, which form from ancient swampy environments. Although this story partly belongs to geology and energy history, it also matters geographically, because the Latrobe Valley became one of the state's most important industrial regions. Its resources shape settlement, power generation, transport corridors, and economic development. Again, the pattern is clear. Geography is not just scenery. It controls where people live, what resources they use, where roads and railways go, where industries form, and how regions connect to one another. But the most spectacular geographic feature of Gippsland lies closer to the coast, the Gippsland Lakes. At first, the lakes seem almost calm and simple, a broad network of water bodies near the coast. But their existence is the result of an enormous battle between rivers and the sea. Rivers flowing out of highlands carry water and sediment toward Bass Strait. At the same time, waves and coastal currents move sand along the shoreline. Over thousands of years, this sand built long coastal barriers. These barriers partially enclosed the lowlands behind them. Rivers entering the coast could no longer flow directly into open ocean as easily. Water accumulated behind the barriers. Lagoons expanded, wetlands formed, and eventually, the Gippsland Lakes developed into one of the largest coastal lagoon systems in Australia. This is a landscape caught between worlds. Freshwater enters from rivers such as the Latrobe, Thomson, McAllister, Avon, Nicholson, Tambo, and Mitchell. Saltwater enters from the sea. The balance changes with tides, storms, floods, and human modification. Sometimes the system behaves more like a freshwater lake. At other times, more like an estuary. It is neither fully river nor fully ocean. It is a hybrid landscape. One built by the constant negotiation between inland water and coastal energy. The scale is enormous. Lakes such as Lake Wellington, Lake Victoria, and Lake King form a broad interconnected system. Channels, marshes, islands, and wetlands surround them. Bird life, fish, aquatic plants, and coastal ecosystems all depend on these environments. For people, the lakes have shaped transport, fishing, tourism, and settlement. Towns such as Lakes Entrance, Paynesville, and Bairnsdale are all connected to this geography, but the lakes could not exist as they do without one of the most striking coastal features in Australia, 90 Mile Beach. This long barrier beach runs along the Gippsland coast for roughly 150 kilometres. Standing on it, the landscape feels almost endless. Sand stretches toward the horizon. Bass Strait rolls in from the south. Behind the beach lie the lakes, wetlands, and lowlands of Gippsland. In front of it is open water. 90 Mile Beach is not just a beach. It is a wall, a narrow sandy barrier separating an inland lagoon system from the ocean. Without it, the Gippsland Lakes would be exposed to far more direct marine influence. The entire shape of eastern Victoria's coast would be different. This relationship between beach and lake is one of the most important geographic stories in the state. It shows how delicate some landscapes are. A river system alone did not create the lakes. The ocean alone did not create them. They formed because rivers delivered water and sediment, while waves built barriers and reshaped the coastline. Geography emerged from opposition. Inland forces pushing outward, marine forces pushing back, and between them, an entire lagoon system appeared. This coastal story also demonstrates that Victoria's geography is young in many places, not in the age of its rocks, but in the form of its surface. Sea levels have not always been where they are today. Coastlines have shifted, valleys have drowned, barriers have formed, and lakes have expanded and changed. During the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower, the coastline of southeastern Australia looked very different. Bass Strait was partly exposed. Tasmania was connected to mainland Australia. Rivers flowed across landscapes that are now beneath the sea. Then, as the climate warmed and ice melted, rising oceans flooded lowlands and reshaped the coast. This process did not only affect Gippsland, it also created one of the most important geographic features in Victoria, a vast bay further west, a bay that would eventually become the heart of the state. But before we reach it, we need to understand the landscape that connects Gippsland to central Victoria, because travelling west from Gippsland is not simply a movement from coast to city, it is a movement through the southern foothills of the Great Dividing Range. Chapter 3. From forests to the central corridor. Leaving Gippsland, the land begins to change again. The enclosed, wet, forested landscapes of the east gradually give way to a more complex central region. The mountains do not disappear all at once, instead they fragment. Ranges continue to rise north and east of Melbourne, forested hills remain, valleys guide rivers and roads, but the land begins to open toward the broad lowlands around Port Phillip Bay. This transition is one of the reasons Melbourne exists where it does. To the east and northeast of the city, the Yarra Ranges form part of the broader highland system. These ranges are not as high as the Victorian Alps, but they are extremely important. They capture rainfall, they support forests, they feed the Yarra River, and they provide much of Melbourne's water supply. This is another example of how geography quietly controls human life. Millions of people in Melbourne depend on water captured in forested mountain catchments to the east. The city may appear urban and disconnected from nature, but geographically, it is tied directly to the surrounding highlands. The Dandenong Ranges, rising east of Melbourne, create another distinct landscape. It is the remains of an ancient explosive volcanic system, and they are close enough to the city to feel suburban in places, yet high and wet enough to support tall forests, fern gullies and cool temperate environments. They act as a green edge to the metropolis, a reminder that Melbourne sits not in an empty flat plain, but between bay, river, basalt plains, uplands and forested ranges. The Yarra River is the key connector. It begins in the Yarra Ranges and flows westward toward Port Phillip Bay. Today, many people know it mainly as the river that runs through central Melbourne, but geographically it is much more than an urban waterway. It is the link between the highlands and the bay. It carries the story of eastern rainfall into the heart of Victoria's largest city. Its valley provided a route through the landscape. Its lower reaches offered water, access and settlement opportunities. And its mouth helped define where Melbourne would grow. As we follow this westward movement, the journey begins to shift. We are no longer in the wild east. We are approaching the geographic centre of modern Victoria, a place shaped by the meeting of a river, bay, plain and human settlement, Port Phillip Bay. This bay is so important that it deserves its own chapter, because without it, Victoria's history would have been completely different. Melbourne may not have become Melbourne. The state's population may have concentrated elsewhere, trade routes may have developed differently, and the economic geography of southeastern Australia may have taken another path. Port Phillip Bay appears permanent today, a huge sheltered body of water surrounded by suburbs, beaches, ports and roads. But it is not ancient in its current form. It is a relatively young coastal feature, a flooded landscape created by rising seas after the last ice age. Around 20,000 years ago, global sea levels were far lower than they are today. So much water was locked in ice sheets that the coastline of southeastern Australia extended far beyond its present position. Bass Strait was largely exposed. Tasmania was connected to the mainland across the Bassian Plain. Animals and people could move across landscapes that are now beneath the ocean. Where Port Phillip Bay now lies, there was not always water. Instead, there were lowlands and drainage systems. Then the planet warmed. Ice melted, sea levels rose, the sea pushed inland. Bass Strait flooded, Tasmania became separated, and the low-lying basins along the Victorian coast were drowned. Port Phillip Bay formed as the ocean invaded this landscape. The former lowland became a vast marine basin. Only a narrow entrance connected it to Bass Strait. This entrance, the Heads, remains one of the most dramatic parts of the bay's geography. A huge body of water lies behind a relatively narrow opening. Every tide moving in or out of Port Phillip must pass through this constricted gap. The result is strong currents, dangerous waters, and a coastline that has shaped navigation for generations. But from a settlement perspective, the bay was extraordinary. It offered sheltered water along a southern coastline exposed to powerful seas. It provided access to inland routes. It received the Yarra River, and it created the geographic conditions needed for a major port city. Melbourne grew where river met bay, where freshwater met sheltered marine access, where inland routes met maritime trade. This is why Port Phillip Bay is not just another coastal feature, it is the geographic foundation of modern Victoria. The bay shaped settlement, settlement shaped transport, transport shaped industry, industry shaped population, and population shaped the state. By the time we reach Port Phillip, our east to west journey has already revealed several of Victoria's defining patterns. The mountains create water, water creates rivers, rivers create valleys, lakes and settlement corridors. The sea floods lowlands and creates bays, and where these features intersect, human history accelerates. By the time our journey reaches Melbourne, we have already crossed several of the landscapes that define southeastern Australia. We began in a high country, where Victoria rises into the Australian Alps. We followed the Great Dividing Range as it captured rainfall, fed rivers, shaped forests and created the wet eastern spine of the state. We moved through Gippsland, where mountains, rivers and the sea combined to form one of Australia's great coastal lagoon systems. We followed those rivers and forests westward toward Port Phillip Bay, a flooded Ice Age landscape that became the geographic foundation of Melbourne, and in doing so, we have seen how eastern Victoria was shaped by water. But this is only half of Victoria's story, because beyond Melbourne, the landscape changes again. The land begins to rise into older uplands, the forests become drier, the rocks beneath the surface begin to tell a different story. A story of ancient oceans, folded sediments, quartz reefs, buried rivers, and one of the greatest gold rushes the world has ever seen. From there, our journey will continue westward into the Victorian goldfields, then across the great river plains of the Murray Basin, through one of Australia's youngest volcanic provinces, past the sandstone walls of the Grampians, into the dry mallee country of the northwest, and finally down to the wild cliffs, rainforests and storm-battered coastline of the Southern Ocean. Eastern Victoria was shaped by mountains, rainfall, rivers and the sea, but Western Victoria was shaped by something different: gold, fire, wind, stone and ocean. That is where part 2 of our journey begins. If you enjoyed this first part of the journey, consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps support these longer documentaries and lets me keep making deep dives into Australia's landscapes, geology and natural history. And I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this broader geography style video, leave a comment below and let me know. If enough people enjoy it, I will continue this series and explore more of Australia's regions in future videos. I hope you found this as interesting as I did, and as always, thanks for watching. Before I end this video, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much to everyone that helps to support this channel.